So for some of you, this session is going to be more of a reminder of the new regulation and the way that the Regulator of Social Housing works. And for some of you, this might be more of an introduction to what we do and how we work. And either way, I hope that you can all take something away from this. But obviously, we have the Q&A and the chat at the end. So please, sort of, put stuff in the chat function and stick your hand up at the end, and we can discuss further and sort of cover anything you're not clear on. Can I have the next slide, please, Helen? Lovely. So you will notice throughout this presentation, the slides do have quite a lot of text on them. And the intention is, so I'll read through, so you won't miss anything if you want to listen or if you want to read, but the intention is that this resource is something that you can use afterwards to remind yourself or to share with other tenants or other colleagues that you might have. But if we start with a bit of context, so the starting point for the Regulator of Social Housing is that tenants' homes should be safe and well maintained, and that landlords should deliver effective services. Importantly, tenants should be able to hold their landlord to account for the delivery of those services. It's our job to help ensure that landlords deliver what tenants need and that landlords deliver on those expectations for tenants. You'll all be aware that from the 1st of April 2023, we were able to introduce a new approach to consumer regulation to reflect the change in the powers that we've been granted by government. And these include powers around compelling landlords to collect and publish tenant satisfaction measure data. That's what the TSM stands for there. Brand new consumer standards. We have started our new regime. We are on site with a number of landlords at the moment, inspecting them under our new consumer standards, seeking evidence, seeking assurance that they are delivering against our new standards. But important to note, what hasn't changed is our approach in terms of regulating non-local authority landlords, so housing associations and for-profit providers. Those landlords are still subject to our existing governance and financial viability standards, as well as the new consumer standards. Can I have the next slide, please, Helen? I thought I would just go over a sort of refresher and a reminder of how the Regulator for Social Housing regulates. This is all on our website, and on our website we have a lot of information about how we regulate and our approach to inspections, and I would encourage you to go and have a look at that if that's something you're interested in more detail. But just as an overview, these are our kind of 5 key principles of regulation. So the Regulator of Social Housing regulates at a landlord level. We think the key to driving improvements for tenants is for landlords to deliver that. So we regulate landlords and we check that they are doing what they need to do to deliver for their tenants. We're co-regulatory, which means that landlords are responsible for putting things right if there are issues. We are risk-based, and that means that we focus more on areas of where there might be the potential for harm or actual harm for tenants, and those are the areas where we focus greater scrutiny. We are assurance-based, which is another way of saying we are evidence-based. And what we do when we work with landlords is we expect them to provide evidence of how they are delivering against our standards. So we don't take the approach that we're really directive and we say, this is exactly how landlords need to run. Instead, what we say is, these are the outcomes we expect landlords to deliver for tenants, which we designed in partnership with tenants as well as landlords. So we say, these are the outcomes we expect you to deliver, show us how you're doing it, rather than this is the approach that you must take in order to deliver these outcomes. And we think that's the best way to deliver services with and for tenants. And then the last one of these 5 is that, as I've mentioned, we focus on the delivery of outcomes. So we think it is best that landlords work out with tenants the best way to deliver what they need to do to meet our standards. Can I have the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, the new aspect of what we're doing, the new part from the 1st of April earlier this year, are our consumer standards. So we have 4 new standards that apply to all landlords, so local authorities, housing associations, for-profits, all social landlords must deliver the outcomes included in our consumer standards. They will cover a lot of the stuff that was previously in our standards, so around safety and quality, antisocial behaviour, all of those things. But they also bring to the fore some new expectations around accountability and influence and tenant engagement. Within our consumer standards, we have the tenant satisfaction measure requirements. And again, that's the TSM abbreviation that you'll see there. And I'll talk about what the TSMs are. I'm sure you're reasonably familiar with them, but I'll just give you a reminder on the next slide. But just for now, when we are, and as I mentioned, we're on site now, we're inspecting some landlords now, and we'll continue to do that. When we are on site and doing our inspections, looking at these consumer standards, we are looking for boards of housing associations and councillors in local authorities to have robust mechanisms in place to provide them with assurance to prove to themselves, as the leaders of these organisations, that their organisation is delivering the outcomes of our standard and the tenant satisfaction measures. And then, as I said, it's up for landlords to show us as the regulator with evidence, so not promises, not nice words, not plans, but with evidence that they are delivering those outcomes. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the tenant satisfaction measures are abbreviated to the TSMs. I'm not a fan of abbreviation, except when it comes to the TSMs, because tenant satisfaction measures is a right mouthful. So the tenant satisfaction measures, there are 22 of them. There are 12 survey questions, perception measures, which means asking tenants their views on services, not to receiving a service. So it's not like you've had a repair done, how was the repair service? The tenant satisfaction measures use perception questions. So we say, thinking about the last time you used the repair service, what did you think of it? So they are a set of performance information for landlords, which have to be calculated in a way that the regulator has set. They must be collected according to requirements that the regulator has set. So we've set some really strict criteria about how you collect this data, how you work it out, and also how you send it to us and when. The aim of the tenant satisfaction measures really is to give tenants meaningful information about their landlord. So the tenant satisfaction measures are landlords' data, which is published to tenants, and the Regulator of Social Housing is overseeing that process. The TSMs will also help the regulator to understand how the new consumer standards are being met. So after a few years of data collection, we should be able to see if figures are changing in the right direction, if our consumer regulation is working properly. Importantly, the tenant satisfaction measures are not the only performance information that landlords should collect or publish. They shouldn't wholesale replace what landlords might have been doing before, if that was useful for them in delivering our outcomes and for tenants in terms of transparency and accountability. The tenant satisfaction measures also aren't completely fixed in their requirements. We've committed to review them so that if after a few years of data collection we can see that there are things that need changing, we will conduct a review to understand more about that using evidence that we've collected. Also, there'll be new things that come into the TSM. So, for example, the white paper, which kind of opened the door for all of this new consumer regulation, talked about electrical safety. And that didn't make it into the TSMs, but that will come in at a later date. And then the last point on this slide is that the tenant satisfaction measures are not the only information that tenants or the regulator can and should look at when we are thinking about the performance of providers. And then just to pick up one of the questions I can see pop up there, the first year of the tenant satisfaction measure data should have been collected. We have set a deadline for the end of June for landlords to send us their data. And once we have it, we will put it through an internal review process where we check things like the data quality. We'll also look at what the data is telling us. And we are going to publish a report into the TSMs in the autumn. Now, the next slide, please. So The Regulator for Social Housing inspects registered providers, so we inspect landlords with more than 1,000 homes once every 4 years. But in between that, we don't just leave landlords to get on with it by themselves. We do a lot of work in the background to continue building our picture of how landlords are performing and delivering our outcomes. So in between our programmed inspections, our 4 yearly inspections, we look at a range of data. We ask landlords to send us a range of information, including the tenant satisfaction measures, but also different sort of governance and financial measures as well. When we identify data qualities, we will follow up on them, and that follow-up will involve a range of actions. And in particular, where a landlord's data suggests that they might be at a higher risk of failing to deliver the outcomes of some of our standards, and particularly those that have the potential or actual risk of harm for tenants, we will carry out further assessment. And that might involve things like responsive engagement, so getting in contact with a provider, maybe even an inspection of a provider, depending on what we see in the data.
Yeah.
Can I have the next slide, please? So alongside the data that we ask for from landlords, we also have a way that members of the public, that tenants, MPs, and even staff from housing providers can get in touch with us. And you can get in touch with us via phone or post or email at any time. And you can make a referral to the Regulator of Social Housing. So a referral is a piece of information or some allegations that tell us that a landlord is not delivering the outcomes of our standards. It really helps us if, when you need to make a referral to us, you include details about what has happened, which bits of the standards you think are not being delivered on, maybe how many other people are affected by it. And we will consider the circumstances of each of these referrals on an individual basis. We think about a lot of stuff when we're deciding what to do next with a referral that's come through to us. And I've listed some of the questions that we'll be asking ourselves when we receive a referral. So which standard does the issue relate to? What evidence was provided to kind of back up that there might be a problem here? How long has this been happening for? And how long has the landlord known it was happening? What's the potential impact and scale of the issue? So if this, how many people might be affected, you know, how serious is this? And how is the landlord's action or potentially lack of action contributed to what the referral is talking about? Can I have the next slide, please? So, as I mentioned, we have a program of inspections. So we will come out, we'll be on site with a landlord every 4 years. A large landlord with more than 1,000 homes will be on site every 4 years to carry out an inspection. When we may also carry out a responsive inspection, so that might be in relation to concerns we have about things in a provider's data or a referral that we receive in as well. But every large landlord, every 4 years, we will come out and inspect. And during an inspection, these are the kind of things that we might be looking for in terms of evidence from a landlord. So we ask landlords to provide evidence that data about homes, so including the quality and condition of those homes, data about services, so the repair service, the complaint service, ASB service, and satisfaction is being collected and monitored. So what are they doing to understand the homes that they manage and the people who live in them? And are they taking appropriate and effective action based on what that information is telling them? We'll also look for evidence that insight from tenants is used to inform decision making. And insight from tenants can come from things like tenant surveys, but it can also come from things like tenant panels, tenant focus groups, tenant task and finish workshops. But we're looking for evidence that insight from tenants is being used to inform decision making. We're also looking for evidence that tenants are being provided with relevant, timely, accurate, and importantly, easy to understand information. And that really links into our requirements around transparency and scrutiny. We want to see evidence that recommendations from tenants are being considered delivered, reported on and evaluated, so that sort of when tenants raise an issue or suggest a solution, that it is properly considered, evaluated, and that the feedback loop is closed, so that tenants know that when they're making these recommendations, they're going somewhere. And we also want to make sure, and we'll seek evidence, that there are a range of accessible ways for tenants to have their voices heard. And accessibility is a big part of our standards, so that tenants should be able to interact with opportunities on offer to influence service design and delivery. And as I mentioned, we have a slightly different approach between local authority landlords, who are only subject to our consumer standards, and then all the other social landlords, so housing associations and for-profit providers. And for those, they are subject to our governance and our financial viability standards. So for those providers, those landlords, we are also looking for evidence that there is a clear plan on how they're going to deliver their core purpose of being a social landlord, that the boards have a really good oversight of performance and delivery and how the organisation is being run and where the money is being spent, that boards have a really good understanding and oversight of risks. So any risks that might be thrown up, the board are really on top of those. And also that they're financially resilient, like do they have enough money in the bank to be able to continue to deliver services and run and manage homes. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in our standards, in the consumer standards, which apply to all social landlords, we say that there must be meaningful opportunities for tenants to influence and scrutinise landlord strategies, policies and services. And as I mentioned, we're looking for evidence that that's happening. And this might come from surveys, but it might come from other methods like groups or project work. Part of the evidence that we will gather when we are doing an inspection with a landlord will come from tenants who have taken part in these activities, and we want to hear from them, their views on how that's working. We've also got a range of options that we can use to understand how well services are being delivered to tenants. And so where we have concerns about service delivery, we have got options that we can that a landlord will need to set up a meeting for us to have with tenants, a focus group. We can run surveys with tenants. We can do estate tours. So we've got a range of options that we can use to make sure that we are hearing from tenants during an inspection. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. That's it. Thank you. So when we have completed an inspection, we will come up with a grading and judgment for a landlord. For private registered providers, so housing associations, for-profit providers, as I've mentioned, they're subject to our governance and our financial viability standards, as well as the consumer standards. So for those landlords, they get a G grade, a V grade, and a C grade. For local authority landlords who are only subject to the consumer standards, they get just a C grade. The grades are given on a scale of 1 to 4, and we publish our gradings and judgments on our website. So you should be able to look up your landlord and see their judgments on our website. And we also, when we publish our new findings for the new way we're doing things, the new consumer standards, we'll also provide a short description of what we saw during our investigation or inspection with that provider. And importantly, we expect providers to inform tenants about their regulatory gradings and judgments. Can I have the next slide, please? So here are the consumer gradings and judgments, 1 to 4. It's really important to understand that we expect that every landlord should be aiming for a consumer grade of C1. And a C1 grade just means that overall, the landlord is delivering the outcomes of the standards. We would see that the landlord had demonstrated that it identifies when issues occur and is effective at putting plans in place to remedy and to minimise their reoccurrence. When we see a C2 grade, and I think at this point it's really important to note that the consumer standards are relatively new, and though landlords have had very long lead in time from when we had the green paper, which led to the white paper, which led to the consumer standards. They have had a lot of time to get ready, but there have been a range of issues in the sector, which means that we expect that quite a lot of landlords may not be at C1 yet. So we are anticipating that at C2 judgment, that there are some weaknesses in the landlord delivering the outcomes of the consumer standards, and that improvement is needed for them to get to that C1 grade. Getting down into C3, if you've got a C3 grading, it would suggest that there are serious failings in the landlord delivering the outcomes of our standards, and that significant improvement is needed to get them to that C1 position. And then a C4, our judgment here would be that there are very serious failings in the landlord in terms of their delivery of our consumer standards, and that they need to make fundamental changes to make sure that they can deliver the outcomes we expect. Can I have the next slide, please? So a question that we often get asked is about our regulatory teeth. So what powers do we have and when do we use them? And from the very beginning of this presentation, I talked about we expect landlords to put things right. So we expect landlords to be in charge of, if there's an issue, they need to put it right. They need to work with their tenants to deliver better outcomes. So where we have gradings that aren't C1 and we are requiring some level of improvement with a landlord, we expect them to own that process and to work with tenants to come up with a plan for how they're going to achieve a C1 grade. However, in some cases, we might have concerns that a landlord can't put things right, or they are perhaps, I'm not going to say unwilling, but we don't have faith in their ability to put things right. And in those cases, we do have a range of powers that we can use. I haven't listed all of them here, but just to give you an example of the kind of powers that we do have, we have the power to survey homes. We have the power to carry out inspections. So where we've got concerns, we will come and inspect and check. We've got the power to require performance improvement plans. So show us how you're going to get better, and we will oversee your progress on that plan. We have the power to issue fines. We've got the power to appoint a manager, and that can be a person or it can be a group of people to bring necessary change in the organisation. And we also have the power to remove an officer, and the word officer there also includes things like senior staff, trustees, board members. So those are our powers. We believe that landlords are best placed to deliver the outcomes for tenants, and so we only use our powers where we see serious failings. And the serious failings are things like that tenants are at risk, that the provider, the landlord, has not acted on areas where we said there is an issue here and you need to act. Where the landlord is showing that they don't have the sufficient skill or expertise within them to make the necessary changes to come back into delivering the outcomes that we expect, or just serious failings to yeah. And then, as I mentioned, just to stress again, for non-local authority landlords, so housing associations and for-profit providers, because they are also subject to our governance and our financial viability gradings, we will use, or we can use our powers where we see serious failings in those settings if we've got concerns around probity, which is concerns around fraud or financial mismanagement, and a lack of robust governance arrangements, and then all sort of serious issues with financial viability. So we're worried that they don't have enough money in the bank to continue.